The night my daughter was taken to the hospital with a burning fever, I was in bed with another man. That is the ugliest sentence I have ever had to say out loud. I always woke up before the alarm. Not because I was organized. My body just got there first. Most mornings I was already in the kitchen before the clock hit 6, standing in my socks on the cold floor, putting the kettle on, packing Ellie's little lunchbox, checking whether we still had enough milk, trying to remember if I'd signed the nursery form or only thought about signing it. It was the kind of life that looked small from the outside, but it was full of moving parts, and if I dropped one, I usually felt it by the end of the day. We lived in a small, semi-detached house in a suburb outside the city. Quiet street, same cars, same bins at the curb, same people walking their dogs at the same time every evening. If you drove past our house, you would have seen exactly what we looked like to everyone else. A normal family, a hardworking husband, a young mother, a little girl with too many plastic toys in the front room. Inside that morning, the kitchen smelled like toast and eggs. I was standing at the cooker in one of Daniel's old t-shirts, my hair twisted up badly, when I heard him coming downstairs in his boots. He came in already half-dressed for sight, jacket zipped, phone in one hand, mug in the other. Daniel was 32 then. He worked hard enough for 2 men, and by that point it showed in every part of him. His hands always looked scraped raw even when they were healed. There was usually dust stuck somewhere on him. He carried tiredness the way some people carried cologne. Quietly, but all day. "You're up early again," he said. "I'm always up early." That made him smile a little. "Fayre." He poured coffee, checked his messages, looked out at the weather. I watched him move around the kitchen, the way I had for years. There was nothing cruel about him. That matters. It would be easier to tell this story if there had been. He wasn't a cold man by nature. He was just a practical one. A man who thought in problems and solutions. A man who believed that if he kept the roof over our heads and food in the fridge, then love was there, even if it wasn't always spoken out loud. He came over and kissed my forehead. That should have felt like enough. Some mornings it did. That morning, it felt like a habit he could do, while thinking about concrete deliveries. "I'll be late," he said. "The poor got pushed back yesterday." "Okay. Don't wait for me for dinner." "I won't." He touched my shoulder, like he wanted to add something and didn't know what, then grabbed his keys and left. A few seconds later, I heard the van start, then the engine faded down the street. I stood there with the spatula in my hand and felt the quiet settle. I need to be honest about this part too. I was lonely long before I cheated. Not abandoned. Not mistreated. Lonely. That softer kind. Kind you feel in a decent life when nobody has done one terrible thing, but something important has gone missing anyway. I finished breakfast, woke Ellie, got her dressed, got myself dressed, and by 8:30 I was driving toward town after dropping her at the toddler room in the same preschool where I work. Graham had texted me earlier that morning. "Are you free for 10 minutes? Wanted to ask you something about the year-end trip. Coffee on me." I could have said no. I knew that even then. He was one of the fathers from my class. His son Oliver was bright and charming, and just naughty enough to be forgiven too easily. Graham was one of those men who looked effortless in a way that made ordinary men look even more tired by comparison. Good coat, nice watch, clean nails. He remembered names. He spoke to staff properly. He listened when people answered. Not in a fake way either, which was part of the problem. The coffee shop was warm inside, dark wood, low music, expensive pastries behind the glass. Graham was already there by the window. He stood when he saw me. "Tessa." "Hi." "You look tired," he said. Not rude. Not too familiar. Just enough to make it sound like he'd actually noticed me. I laughed. "That obvious?" "To me, yes." He pulled out the chair opposite him and I sat. Before I could order, he told the barista, flat white for her. I looked at him. "You remembered. You said once it's the only coffee you still enjoy." I had said that. I didn't remember saying it to him. We talked about the school trip at first. Numbers, transport, risk forms, the usual practical things. Then, while I was stirring my coffee, he looked at me and said, "How are you really?" I gave him the automatic answer. Fine. He nodded once. That didn't sound true. I smiled because that was easier than reacting honestly. I'm just tired. Work. Home. Both. Life, I said, trying to keep it light. He leaned back a little. That usually means both. I remember looking down at my cup then, not because I was shy, but because I could feel how relieved some part of me was that somebody had asked. That was the first dangerous moment. Not because he flirted, because I liked being read that quickly. The school's lucky to have you, he said after a while. Oliver talks about you all the time. Hopefully not because he's caused another incident with the paint table. Graham laughed. Only the usual amount. Then, after a pause, he said, I can see why he likes you. It was such a small line. Still, I felt it. I drove back to school telling myself it had been harmless. I said that to myself many times in the months that followed. Harmless. Nothing happened. It's just coffee. It's just talking. It's just attention. What I didn't admit, then, was that attention had already started to matter too much. A week later, he called again after work. I was still in my classroom, stacking picture books and wiping glitter off a table, when my phone lit up with his name. Hi, I said. Hope I'm not interrupting. No, I'm just finishing up. I wanted to ask you something about the summer event. I'm nearby. Can I steal 15 minutes? I should have said tomorrow. I should have said send me an email. Instead, I said, all right. When I got to the coffee shop, there was a small cream shopping bag on the table next to him. The second I saw it, I knew I should leave. What's that? Something for you. You shouldn't have. I know. Then why did you? He smiled. Because I wanted to. He slid the bag toward me. Inside was a skincare set from a brand I had looked at before and walked away from because I could never justify spending that much on myself. Even unopened, it looked expensive. This is too much. It's a thank you. For what? For everything you do that nobody thanks you for. That line got me. I wish it hadn't, but it did. Daniel and I weren't poor exactly, but our money always had somewhere practical to go. Nursery fees, fuel, food, attire, a leak, something breaking, something due. There was never a moment where I would have looked at that kind of gift and thought, yes, I deserve this, I'll buy it for myself. I held the box and felt two things at once. Flattered, uneasy. I can't accept this, I said, though not strongly enough. Yes, you can. No, really. Tessa, his tone stayed calm. I'm not asking for anything. I just wanted to give you something nice. That was how he did it. He never pushed so hard that I had to openly resist him. He left room for me to feel like I was choosing. I took the gift home. That night, I stood in the bathroom, turning the little bottles over in my hands, reading labels I didn't understand, staring at my own face in the mirror. From the bedroom, Daniel called, "You coming?" In a minute. I looked tired, pretty still, maybe in a soft way, but not vivid, not alive in the way I used to feel. Somewhere along the line, I had become useful first and everything else second. I don't say that to blame motherhood or marriage. I'm saying it because it was true for me then. I had stopped treating myself like somebody worth looking at unless there was time left over. Graham's gift made me feel seen. That same night, Daniel forgot something small, and because I was already off balance, it hurt more than it should have. It had been Teacher Appreciation Week at school. Nothing huge. Children had made little cards. Parents had brought chocolates and flowers. The staff had eaten supermarket pastries in the break room and laughed about fingerprints on display boards. I had come home hoping for one small thing from Daniel. A comment, a question, a joke about my fan club of 4-year-olds. Something. He didn't say anything. Halfway through dinner, while he was talking about a subcontractor who'd messed up a delivery, I put my fork down and said, "You forgot." He looked up. Forgot what? I laughed once, but it came out meaner than I intended. Exactly. Tess. It's fine. It's clearly not fine. I looked at him and felt that familiar mix of sadness and irritation. It would have been nice if you'd remembered. Remembered what? Teacher Appreciation Week. Anything. Just something. He rubbed a hand over his face. I'm sorry. I genuinely forgot. I waited. Then he added, I didn't think it was one of those things that mattered that much. That was Daniel all over. Not cruel, not dismissive on purpose, just a man who often realized too late that small things were never really small. It mattered to me, I said. He looked annoyed with himself then. All right. I said sorry. I know. You want me to go out now and get flowers? That made it worse. No. I want you not to think of it only because I had to bring it up. He leaned back in his chair and went quiet. That happened with us sometimes. He would miss the feeling inside what I was saying and hear only the practical complaint. Then he'd retreat because he felt he was already failing a test he hadn't known we were taking. Later that night, he tried to smooth it over in the only way that came naturally to him. In bed, he put his arm around me, kissed my neck, said, "Don't still be annoyed." I let him touch me. I even kissed him back. But I wasn't fully there. And that matters too. My betrayal didn't start with another man's hands. It started with the space I had already allowed to open between my husband and me, and the way I kept stepping around it instead of naming it properly. By early summer, the school was deep into planning the year-end outing. Countryside venue had agreed to host it, and a few of us were going to inspect the place in person. I put my name down immediately. Graham did too, through the parent committee. There were 4 of us in the car that morning. Me, Graham, another mother called Paula, a father named Neil, who loved hearing himself talk. The sky was clear when we left. Everything felt normal. Busy, public, safe. The venue was beautiful in that designed to feel natural way. Wildflowers arranged to look accidental. Wooden signs, a pond, a climbing area, picnic lawns, a row of small lodges for families and retreat guests. We walked through everything with the manager while I took notes and asked sensible questions. All day Graham was attentive without being obvious, handed me a bottle of water before I asked, noticed when the sun was in my eyes, and shifted so I could see the paperwork. Small things, but by then small things were exactly what I was starving for. After lunch, Paula and Neil headed back early to avoid traffic. Graham stayed because there was one final contract detail the manager wanted signed. I stayed because I was the staff lead. It should have taken 20 minutes. Instead, the weather turned. 1 minute bright sky, the next dark cloud and heavy rain, the kind that hits all at once and makes the whole landscape disappear behind water. By the time Graham drove us down the lane toward the road, the little bridge near the bottom had water running over it. He slowed, swore softly, then reversed. What happened? Flooded. We're not getting through that. He turned the car around and took us back. The manager apologized and said the lane might be blocked for hours if the stream kept rising. There was one small lodge still empty if we wanted somewhere dry to wait. I said yes. That's how these things happen sometimes, not with some dramatic announcement that you are about to ruin your life. Just one reasonable choice. Then another. Then another. The lodge was small and warm. Pale walls, a little kitchenette, sofa, armchairs, picture window looking out over the valley, rain battering the glass, wind and the trees, everything private in a way that made my skin feel too tight. At first, we talked about the school trip, numbers, allergies, lunch timing. I clung to that because as long as we stayed practical, I could still pretend there was solid ground under me. Then the conversation shifted. He sat beside me instead of across from me. Not touching, just close. You know what I think, he said. I kept my eyes on the rain outside. What? I think you spend your life making things easier for everyone else, and I don't think enough people notice. That's not true. I think it is. I gave a little laugh because I didn't know what else to do. You don't know my life that well. No, he said, but I know enough to see when a woman's running on empty. That got me because it felt uncomfortably accurate. I turned to face him. You shouldn't talk to me like this. Like what? Like you know me. He held my gaze. I think I do, a little. It would be easier now to rewrite him as obviously manipulative from the start. But that wouldn't be true. Part of what made him dangerous was that he mixed real observation with self-serving intention so well I couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. I've tried not to say this, he said. I know I shouldn't, but I think about you all the time. I stood up too quickly and went to the window. You shouldn't have said that. I know. Then why did you? Because it's true. I'm married. Yes. I have a child. I know. I turned and looked at him. So what exactly are you expecting from me? He stood slowly. Honesty. I almost laughed because the word felt so wrong coming from him and so hard to hear, because it was exactly what I had not been practicing with myself. You're asking the wrong person, I said. No. He took one step closer. I think I'm asking the right one. I just think you're scared. That was the moment I should have left the room. Instead, I stayed. That was my part. Mine. I need to say that cleanly. He came closer and stopped near enough for me to feel the heat off him. He didn't touch me right away. He waited. That was something else he was good at. He knew the power of letting me feel like the last movement had to come from me. Tell me there's nothing here, he said quietly. I opened my mouth. Nothing came out. He touched my hand. I didn't pull away. The first kiss felt almost unreal. The second didn't. After that, everything moved too fast and too naturally at the same time. His mouth, his hands, the rush in my chest, the relief of being wanted, the way all my good sense seemed to become something I could hear from far away, but not reach. By the time we crossed into the bedroom, I had stopped fighting myself. Later, lying beside him in the dark, I stared at the ceiling and felt my body jolting every few minutes with delayed shock. I saw Daniel's face, Ellie's curls after bath time, our kitchen, our bills on the sideboard, my actual life, the one I had stepped outside of for a few hours and somehow damaged anyway. Beside me, Graham slept easily. That should have told me something. The next morning's sunlight came through the curtains and made the whole room look too normal. Birds in the hedge, plates clattering somewhere in the main building, ordinary sounds. Nothing about the outside world matched the mess in my head. I stood in the bathroom looking at myself in the mirror and thought, what have I done? When I came back out, Graham was awake. Morning, he said. I didn't answer. He studied my face and said, that bad. This can't happen again. He sat up against the headboard. Tessa. No. I mean it. I can't do this. You already did. I flinched. He saw it and softened his tone. You don't have to spiral, he said. You wanted this too. That doesn't make it right. No, but it doesn't make it fake either. That was how he kept me caught. He always took the most dangerous parts of what I felt and framed them like honesty, like depth, like something rare and meaningful, instead of what it often was, hunger meeting opportunity. We drove back to town, and I told myself it had been one mistake, one awful mistake. 2 days later, he texted, I can't stop thinking about you. I stared at the message while Ellie threw banana on the floor, and I cleaned it up with one hand. I ignored it for almost an hour. Then I sent, please don't. A minute later I sent, I haven't stopped either. That was the real beginning. After that, the affair became part of my life in the ugliest possible way, slowly enough that I adjusted to it. Lunches that ran too long, hotel rooms in the middle of the day, messages deleted before I got home, gifts I hid, excuses that came too quickly because I had already used them in my head before I said them out loud. I split into 2 versions of myself. One version read stories to Ellie, washed paint pots at school, smiled at parents, made pasta on weeknights, folded Daniel's t-shirts, and stood in the kitchen asking whether we needed dishwasher table. T.S. The other version put on lipstick for staff planning, checked her phone in the bathroom, and let herself feel vivid again in ways that now make me ashamed to admit were thrilling. I kept telling myself it wasn't only physical, that he understood me, that he listened, that he saw me in a way Daniel had stopped seeing me. There was truth buried inside that. That's why it was dangerous. Daniel had stopped seeing parts of me, or maybe he thought he saw them because he loved me and assumed that was enough. He didn't ask enough questions. He didn't know how to sit in emotional conversation for long. If I started talking about feeling low or flat or overwhelmed, he often moved too quickly into fixing mode. You should get more sleep. You should let your mom take Ellie 1 extra day. We can look at the budget. We'll sort it. He meant well. He really did. But sometimes, I didn't want a plan. I wanted to feel felt. I wanted somebody to stay in the mess with me for a minute. Graham did that. Or seemed to. Only now I can see that he only ever had to do it in selected, polished doses. He never had to sit beside me through a sick child, an unpaid bill, a bad mood, a week where I looked terrible and spoke sharply and smelled of nursery paint, and didn't have the energy to be charming. He got the version of me that stepped out of real life to meet him. Of course that felt easier. Daniel noticed I was changing. I know that now. At the time, I mistook his silence for blindness. He asked fewer questions. Worked later. Watched me more. He never made a scene. And some selfish part of me used that as proof that maybe he didn't really know me at all anymore. The truth was worse. He knew enough to be hurt. He just didn't know how to drag it out into the open without blowing up the whole house. By late summer, Graham invited me to the opening weekend of a new boutique retreat in the countryside. I said no the first time. I can't disappear for a whole day, I told him. You can if you say you've got school planning. I'm already lying too much. He looked at me for a second and said, You've been unhappy for a long time. Don't act like taking one day for yourself is the worst thing you've done. That line worked on me because it blurred everything. My loneliness, my guilt, my selfishness, my resentment. It made indulgence sound like survival. I went. That's the truth. I went knowing exactly what I was doing. There was no storm this time, no accident, no excuse built into the weather. Place was beautiful in a way that made ordinary life feel cheap. Stone walls, thick robes, quiet gardens, big bed, good wine, soft lighting, a private terrace. Everything designed to make you feel like reality was somewhere far away and a bit vulgar. Daniel had been invited to the same opening by a friend in construction, but I told him I had to stay late at school and prep for end-of-term activities. My mother had Ellie. I got into Graham's car with my overnight bag in the boot and chose what happened next before it happened. That matters too. We spent the afternoon drinking wine and pretending we were two people with some kind of future. That's the ugliest part to admit. Not that I slept with him, that I let myself build fantasy around it. Later, in bed, I asked the question that had been gathering under everything for weeks. Graham. He turned toward me. What? If I left Daniel? He went still, only for a second, but I felt it. I lifted my head and looked at him. What? That's not a small thing to say. I know. Tessa. No. I pushed up onto one elbow. I need to know what this is. Because I can't keep doing this in the middle forever. He sat up and got out of bed, wrapped the sheet around his waist, walked to the window. That was when I started to understand. Before he even answered, there was something in his body, a distance already forming. My life is complicated, he said at last. So is mine. It's not just my wife. What then? My son, my business, my parents, everything's tied together. And I'm not. He turned then, and what I saw on his face made me feel sick. Not panic, not heartbreak, calculation. The look of a man deciding how to step backward without making himself look cowardly. That's not fair, he said. I laughed because I honestly didn't know what else to do. Not fair. I never promised. No. My voice cracked. You didn't. You made sure you never promised. That's not true. It is. He came closer, hands slightly out, like I was overreacting and he needed to steady me. Tessa, don't make this ugly. That line changed everything for me. Because in that moment, I saw him properly. Not as a rescuer. Not as the one man who had understood me. Just a man who liked what I gave him as long as it didn't cost him his actual life. If I leave my husband, I said, forcing the words out cleanly, will you leave your wife? He looked at me for a long moment. Then he said, carefully, I don't think destroying both our families is the answer. That was it. That was the whole truth. All those aunts, and when reality finally asked something of him, he stepped back and called it wisdom. I got out of bed and wrapped the robe around myself. So that's what I am, I said. Good enough in private, not in public. That's not what I'm saying. It is. He tried to soften it. Of course he did. He said I was emotional. He said he cared about me. He said what we had was real, but life was complicated. I heard none of it the way I had before. Then my phone started vibrating in my bag across the room. I ignored it once. Then it rang again. And again. Something cold moved through my chest. I grabbed the phone. 6 missed calls from my mother, 3 from Daniel, 1 voicemail. I called Daniel back straight away. He answered on the first ring. Tessa. The sound of his voice was wrong. Too flat, too controlled. In the background, I could hear hospital noise. My stomach dropped. Daniel. Where are you? I opened my mouth and nothing came out. Ellie's got a high fever, he said. Your mum's been trying to reach you for hours. Everything inside me fell through the floor. What? She wouldn't settle. She was burning up. I brought her in. I put my hand over my mouth. I can still feel that moment in my body. The shame of it. The instant collapse of all that private fantasy into something dirty and stupid and unforgivable. I'm coming, I said. I'm coming right now. Is she okay? They're checking her. I'm coming. There was a pause, a heavy one. I could hear all the things he was not saying. Then he said, fine. And the line went dead. I started throwing clothes on with shaking hands. Graham said my name behind me. Tessa. My daughter is in hospital. That shut him up. Good, I thought. Shut up. Don't speak to me like any of this means something now. He drove me back because there was no time for anything else. The whole way I stared out the window and hated myself with a kind of raw clarity I had not allowed before. At one point he said quietly, I'm sorry. I didn't answer. I had no room left for his voice. Pediatric ward was too bright when I got there. Bright in that hard hospital way that makes everyone look more tired than they already are. My trainers squeaked on the floor while I hurried down the corridor toward the room number Daniel had sent me. My mother was sitting beside Ellie's. Daniel was standing by the window with his arms folded. Ellie was asleep. Her cheeks were red. Her curls were damp against her forehead. One tiny hand lay outside the blanket. The sight of her nearly finished me. Mum. My mother looked up. She did not ask where I had been. That was the worst part. She just looked at my face for one long second, and I knew she had understood enough already. Her temperature's come down a bit, she said quietly. They're keeping her overnight. I moved to the bed and touched Ellie's hand. Behind me, Daniel still said nothing. When I turned to look at him, what struck me hardest was not anger. It was restraint. He looked exhausted, dust still on his shirt, face gray with tiredness. And still, he had chosen not to explode in a hospital room with our sick child. That restraint made me feel smaller than shouting would have. Later, after my mother went home for a few hours, I sat beside Ellie's bed while Daniel tried to sleep on the fold-out bench against the wall. Every time Ellie stirred, he was up immediately, checking her temperature, smoothing her hair, whispering, "It's okay, sweetheart. Daddy's here." I sat there listening to him and understood, maybe for the first time in months, the difference between being intensely wanted in private and being depended on in real life. The next morning my mother came back with coffee and a clean t-shirt for Daniel. Ellie was sleeping more peacefully by then. Daniel went home to shower before work. The second he left, my mother sat down opposite me and waited. I couldn't stand it. Mum, don't tell me you were at school. That was all she said. I started crying almost at once. Not elegant crying, not silent tears, just ugly, exhausted crying that made me feel like I was falling apart in public. She let me cry. Then she said, quietly, I need you to say it plainly. If you soften it, you'll keep lying to yourself. So I told her. The gifts, the messages, the first night, the hotels, the retreat, Ellie being in hospital while I was with him. When I finished, she sat very still for a moment. Then she said, a man who only ever meets you in hidden places only has to bring the best version of himself. He arrives rested, dressed well, saying exactly what you need to hear. Your husband doesn't get to love you like that. He has to love you inside real life. Bills, illness, work, repetition, responsibility. I cried harder because it was true. She went on, not preachy, not dramatic, just painfully direct. You fell for how you felt around him. That isn't the same as loving him. I wiped my face. I know. Do you? I couldn't answer. She looked toward Ellie. When life interrupted, where was he? That question stayed with me. Because the answer was so simple. He was by the window, protecting himself. When Ellie was discharged, I went home with her and knew the affair was over, even before I ended it properly. Not because I had become good again, because the illusion had cracked. I had seen too much. Graham sent one more message. I never meant to hurt you. I stared at it for a long time before deleting it. That line didn't move me anymore. It sounded weak, self-serving, like someone regretting fallout, not harm. I blocked his number. At home, Daniel didn't drag a confession out of me. He didn't shout, didn't go through my phone, didn't give me the scene I probably deserve. He just got quieter, more careful. That somehow hurt more. He still made Ellie cereal if I overslept, still checked whether we needed petrol, still sent messages asking if there was anything to pick up on the way home, still carried normal life on his back like he always had. But there was distance now, not loud, just everywhere. So I changed first. I started waking earlier, packing his lunch, putting my phone down, listening properly when he spoke, taking Ellie to the park instead of sitting there half-checking messages. Being present, really present, not because I thought this would erase what I'd done, because I finally understood how absent I had become. At first, he barely reacted. Then, one morning, he came downstairs and found coffee already made, Ellie giggling in her high chair, and me cooking breakfast before he had even reached for the kettle. Something flickered across his face. Not trust, but maybe the first hint that he saw I was trying to come back. The real collapse came on a Saturday afternoon. Daniel was outside in the garden trying to put together a second-hand slide for Ellie while I cleaned our bedroom. I knocked an old storage box off the top shelf of the wardrobe, and a small black notebook slid out with the receipts and batteries and bits of rubbish we kept meaning to sort. It fell open to Daniel's handwriting. I sat on the edge of the bed and started reading. The first pages were ordinary. Work notes, measurements, money worries. Then the writing changed. I think she's slipping away from me, and I don't know how to stop it without sounding pathetic. I stared at that line until it blurred. I turned the page. She looks at her phone and smiles at things she doesn't share anymore. I asked if she was happy, and she said she was just tired. I wanted to believe her, because the other possibility felt like something I couldn't survive. My hands started shaking. I kept reading. I know I've failed her in some ways. I come home wrecked and act like turning up is enough. Maybe sometimes it isn't. Maybe I've made her feel like a function instead of a woman. I don't know how to fix that without making it awkward, and by the time I realize I should say something, the moment's gone. That was Daniel exactly. Loving, clumsy, late. Then I got to the hospital entry. I got sent a photo today. She said she was at school. The photo says otherwise. I looked at it in the corridor while Ellie was inside with a fever, and I thought I might be sick. I had to stop reading for a second because my vision was blurring. I deleted the photo. I couldn't bear to keep it, but I couldn't bear to confront her there either, not with our little girl in a hospital bed. Maybe that makes me weak, or maybe I still loved her enough to protect her even then. That line broke me. Not because he had known. Because he had known and still chosen not to destroy me in front of other people. The line that finished me was written smaller than the rest. If she comes back, I don't want her crawling. I just want her honest. I can survive almost anything, except being lied to in my own home. I slid off the bed and sat on the floor crying with the notebook pressed against my chest. Outside the window, I could hear Ellie laughing in the garden and Daniel saying, "Careful, sweetheart, not too fast." It hit me then, with a force I had somehow avoided before. Graham had only ever had to want me. Daniel had to carry me, our daughter, our life, and my betrayal without dropping everything in the middle of it. That night after Ellie was asleep, Daniel sat on the sofa pretending to watch television. I stood in the doorway for almost a full minute before he noticed me. "What?" I sat down at the other end of the sofa and clasped my hands together because they were shaking. I need to tell you something. His face changed immediately. Not surprise. Recognition. He muted the television. There was someone else, I said. He didn't move. I ended it after the hospital. I should have ended it long before that. I should never have started it. Still nothing. I could feel tears coming already. I was lonely, and I let that become permission. I kept telling myself he saw me, and maybe he did in some ways, but mostly I was hiding from my own life and using you as the excuse. That part is mine. I know that. He stared at me, quiet and steady. I found your notebook, I said, my voice dropping. I shouldn't have read it, but I did. He closed his eyes briefly. I know now how much I hurt you. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and rough. I kept waiting for you to choose the truth on your own. That sentence cut deeper than any shouting could have. I started crying properly then. I'm sorry. You keep saying that like it goes somewhere. I know it doesn't fix anything. No, he said, it doesn't. I wiped my face with both hands. I'm not asking you to pretend it didn't happen. I'm asking if there's any part of you left that still wants this family. He looked at me for a long time. I do, he said at last. That's the pathetic part. It isn't pathetic. It feels like it. I flinched. The second he saw that, he looked away, ashamed of hurting me even then. That was Daniel too. It's important that I say that. He wasn't a saint. He could be emotionally absent, slow, stubborn, but he was never careless with pain once he saw it clearly. He rubbed his face. I know I missed things, he said. I know I buried myself in work and acted like paying for life was the same as being present inside. I know I made you feel alone sometimes. Tears kept coming. That wasn't an excuse. No, he said. It wasn't. We sat there with that truth. Eventually, I moved a little closer and said, I don't expect forgiveness tonight. You won't get it tonight. I know. There was a long silence. Then he held out his hand. I stared at it before I took it in both of mine. His hand was rough and warm and real. Nothing polished, nothing effortless. The hand of a man who worked outside in bad weather and came home too tired and still checked whether the doors were locked before bed. I bent over it and cried against his knuckles. When he pulled me toward him, it wasn't some beautiful reconciliation scene. It was two exhausted people in a dim room trying to work out whether a badly damaged thing could still be carried. Weeks later, we slept together again. Not because everything was healed, because honesty had made closeness possible again in small pieces. When Daniel kissed me, he did it carefully, like he was half afraid I might pull away and half afraid I might not. When I kissed him back, it didn't feel triumphant. It felt sad, tender, scared. In bed, both of us cried at different points and pretended not to notice the other had noticed. Afterward, I lay against his chest and listened to his heartbeat and knew two things at once. What I had done would never become small just because we stayed married. And staying married was still what I wanted. Autumn came in slowly after that. Trust rebuilt itself in tiny, ordinary ways. A message answered quickly, telling him where I was going without acting irritated, sitting through hard conversations instead of sidestepping them, him reaching for the back of my neck in the kitchen, me not looking away when his hurt showed up on his face unexpectedly. Some days felt almost normal. Other days, I would catch him staring at nothing for a second too long, and I would know exactly where he had gone in his head. That was the real price. Not one explosion, not one punishment, the afterlife, the long, uneven life of what I had done inside our house. The final proof of who Graham really was came on an ordinary Sunday. I was driving to my mother's house with Ellie asleep in the back seat. Daniel had gone ahead earlier to help fix part of her fence. Near the high street, traffic slowed. People were gathered outside an upscale wine bar, phones raised. At first, I thought there had been an accident. Then I saw Graham. He was standing beside a dark SUV, with one hand partly over his face. In front of him was his wife, rigid with rage. Near the curb stood another woman, younger than me, crying openly, mascara down her cheeks. People around them were murmuring, not quietly either. Apparently someone had sent his wife photos. Apparently, this wasn't his first affair. Apparently, he had been sloppy enough this time to get caught in daylight. I looked at him and felt something cold and clear move through me. He looked smaller than I remembered, more ordinary. The polish was gone. The charm was gone. Under real consequence, he was just a man in a good coat, trying not to drown in his own mess. For 1 second, I thought he might look up and see me. He didn't. Traffic started moving again. I drove on gripping the wheel so hard my wrists hurt. What I felt then wasn't closure exactly. It was horror with relief under it, because I could see, really see, how close I had come to becoming part of that kind of public ruin. My name in other parents' mouths. My daughter growing up inside whispers. Daniel forced into not only private pain, but public humiliation. At the next red light, I looked in the rearview mirror. Ellie was still asleep, one hand curled around the strap of her little rabbit backpack. I had nearly traded something real for something that couldn't even survive daylight. By the time I reached my mother's house, Daniel was in the garden with a drill in one hand and Ellie's scooter upside down beside him. He looked up when I came through the gate. "You took ages." There was traffic. He nodded and went back to the fence. I stood there watching him for a second. The line of his shoulders, the concentration on his face, the complete lack of performance in him, the fact that 10 minutes earlier the last scraps of fantasy I had attached to another man had finally rotted away, and Daniel knew none of it. I crossed the grass and wrapped my arms around him from behind. He startled, then half-turned. "You all right?" I pressed my face into his back. "Yes," I said, and for once I meant it cleanly. "I just needed to touch you." He set the drill down and turned fully toward me. There was still hurt in his face, still caution, still all the history of what I had done. There was love there too. Not glamorous love, not exciting love, tired, stubborn, real love. The kind that had shown up at the hospital, the kind that had made school lunches and paid bills, and carried our life even while I was busy resenting how unromantic it looked. He touched my cheek. "Okay," he said softly. That was all. No big speech. No neat ending. Just okay. That's probably the truest ending I can give you. Not that everything was fixed, it wasn't. Some wounds stayed tender. Some days Daniel still went quiet, and I knew why. Some days I hated myself all over again. Some days he looked at me with a hurt so old and fresh at the same time that I felt I had no right to ask for patience. But there was honesty now where there had been secrecy. There was work where there had been fantasy. There was Ellie, growing and laughing, and needing both of us in practical, daily ways that made performance useless and presence everything. And there was this truth, which I learned too late to stay innocent, but not too late to understand. Tension can feel like love when you've gone too long without tenderness. Desire can feel like rescue when you're lonely enough. But real love is not built out of stolen intensity. It's built out of showing up when Fayre is ugly, repetitive, exhausting, and unromantic. It's built out of staying. I nearly traded that for something that only knew how to survive in private. I have to live with that. And maybe living with it, honestly, is the only decent thing I can do now.